Okay. Am I audible? Am I visible?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so hello everyone. I am Beena Thakkar, the marketing manager at 3D Surgical, and I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you joining us today for this webinar on opportunities and challenges in personalized medical devices. So thank you so much for being here. And as we all know, personalized medical device landscape is rapidly transforming patient care, like making treatments more tailored, efficient, and effective. Today, we have an esteemed panel of experts with us who will share their insights into how these advancements are shaping the future and the unique challenges that come with them. So, I am excited to introduce our panelists for today. Our first panelist is Ketan, CEO of 3D Surgical. He's a healthcare innovator specializing in surgical robotics, orthopedic implant design, and medical device development. With a focus on simplifying workflows, he has launched numerous products globally to meet healthcare professionals' needs.
Thank you,
Next,
Beena. Thanks for having us.
sure. Next, we have Jitendra Singh, Senior Director at Jajal Medical. He is an expert in 3D printing for medical applications, including anatomical models, surgical guides, and patient-specific implants. He brings extensive experience in designing and processing medical imaging for custom solutions.
Thanks, Beena. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Finally, joining us is Erik Boelen, CEO of Case 3D. He's a biomedical engineer with over 15 years of experience in medical 3D printing and ISO 13485 quality management. He helps companies leverage additive manufacturing to create high quality personalized medical devices. So, together we will explore the latest innovations, technical obstacles, and the regulatory landscape impacting personalized medical devices. With that, let's dive into the discussion and uncover what's next for the personalized medical healthcare. So, Jitendra, let's start with you. Could you start us off with your perspective on what are the opportunities and advantages in personalized medical devices?
Yeah, of course. So, when we talk about these personalized medical devices now in today's era, I would say there's significant growth and innovation, driven by these advances in the technology, which definitely emphasize on this precise medicine and personalized, medical devices. Now, it's important because these aim to cater to very unique needs of that very individual patient, right? And there are a lot of factors that are involved in it. Each of us have a different anatomy. The defects, the diseases are very specific, right? The health conditions overall. So that is where I would say, the personalized medical device is finding its way, so that it's being catered as per the individual's health conditions. Now, since you asked about the opportunities, based on today's essence of the webinar, we'll restrict it to personalized intra-op medical devices that we generally do, like customized implants or these patient-specific surgery models, anatomical models, or the pre-op planning in the instruments that can be used intra-op. But having said that, right, there's also again tremendous opportunities in the other areas when it comes to personalized medicine, which is regenerative or bioprinting. You could have a personalized drug delivery system, right? Imagine you can basically adjust the dose of a drug and the timing of the drug based on a specific individual's health condition. Other
So
than
can
that,
you
of
have
course,
share a real life case study like with pre-operative planning where it played a crucial role?
yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll get into that. Yeah, basically, so when we talk about these specific pre-operative plannings, right? As when we specifically these clinicians when they go through the defect or the disease of that patient, even now they also plan the surgery prior, which helps them to kind of reduce these intraoperative time and of course, improving the overall clinical efficiency. So I'll just quickly walk you through a couple of them. In fact, if you allow me to share my screen, sure, can I? Let me. It says I'm not able to screen share. Maybe you can give me that, right? And I'll just quickly share those case studies where the pre-operative planning, right? So these are basically the arthroplasty or the revision cases. What I
Okay,
want
you can
to,
try it. I have given you the access. That might work now.
yeah, perfect. we are talking about this, pre-operative planning, I would just quickly walk you through a specific arthroplasty case of a hip revision, right? We can see how the pre-op condition is, and in order to kind of decide for that personalized medical solution, whether it's a guide or an implant, you'll have to walk through specific, deformity, and then how do we really plan the surgery better. We get the CT scan, convert that into 3D model, get the 3D model also printed, so that there could be various surgical approaches that a clinician can try on. And with that, of course, there's a lot of other parameters like shape, size of the standard implants, if at all something is being used along with these devices, that could be defined here very clearly. Moving on to, right, in this very specific case, when we're talking about the reaming of an acetabulum cup, it's also important that you kind of maintain the safe margin and you don't really hit the posterior wall completely, and damage any of the crucial nerves thereby, right? So it's also important that way where one can also plan based on the model or the anatomical structures, what is the safe margin for that specific cup cavity, right? And then of course from there, if there's a requirement, this very case is specifically talking about a customized implant that was designed for that very individual patient. So again, patient specific implant. With that, of course, how do these implant really fit in? What's the fixation of this implant like? What are the screws trajectory that we could use for the maximum bone purchase? And also the screw lengths and everything, right? Basically, where are these screws going? So that we ensure the better fixation and the stability of the implant, which also kind of, reduces the chances of revision in future. So these kind of planning is definitely important when you're working of a complex arthroplasty cases like this one, what we are looking at. Similarly, when we, kind of also extrapolate this to other arthroplasty, whether it's ankle arthroplasty or shoulder or knee, this remain very similar. So I'm going to just quickly also show you this other case of the shoulder arthroplasty, which is a reverse shoulder arthroplasty. It's important, to have this humerus component and the glenoid fossa component that you see on the screen. And the peg length of the implant, right? So this very specific picture can help you understand what is the maximum length that we will be getting of the implant's peg. So it's important to kind of plan it prior to the surgery so that you spend less time on the table. And then of course, the patient basically is on the table less under the less anesthesia effect. Recovery happens faster, and quite other factors come into play. So this very specific case, we were able to kind of just pick it up of the model, discuss what's the maximum bone purchase, what is the standard reaming that could be there, and also, further, if there's any bone areas that needs to be kind of resurfaced or reshaped to get the perfect fit, right? And the size and shape, as I was mentioning, even in the previous arthroplasty. So these are few of the cases. Of course, this kind of extrapolates to everywhere, right? From oral maxillofacial to neurology cases, to orthopedics, every domain, I must say.
Understood. Thank you, Jitendra. So, Eric, do you want to add to what Jitendra is saying? Like, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think Jitendra showed some very nice and impressive cases. And personally, I'm very happy to see that personalized medical devices are really becoming common ground nowadays. When I started in this field, it was, I think, around 13 years ago. We were pioneers. There wasn't a lot of stuff happening on the personalized space. So we had to convince very skeptic surgeons that this was something that was worthwhile. And I actually have been on a mission ever since, because I still deserve that everyone, or I still think that everyone deserves a patient-specific implant for his or her anatomy. I think it just makes sense that instead of seeing a surgeon adapting your anatomy to a specific pre-made standard-sized implant, I think it's much better that the implant is actually made to the anatomy of the patient, which will, of course, have the benefits, as Jitendra also already described a little bit, where you have shorter surgery. The shorter the surgery is, the faster the patient will recover. But I also believe that the implant will have a better functionality if it was designed and produced specifically for one patient. And with that, I'm convinced that we'll also have an improved longevity, that the implant will last longer because it functions better and because it was made for one patient. And I'm just excited to see that this is no longer a game for, how do you say it, small innovative companies, but also a lot of larger companies are now seeing the benefits and actually offering personalized portfolio to their clients, which also helps to improve the quality, but it's something I bet will come back to that point.
Agree, totally agree. Okay, so Ketan, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so my take on this is personalized medicine is going to continue, but it's going to be specifically only limited cases, right? It's not going to be that you will have this for every patient, right? So I strongly believe that personalized surgery will continue, especially when it comes to say custom implants and all. It's going to be limited to maybe 2 to 5% of the total population. While there is a lot of buzz, there is also a ground reality where it may not be always possible to do personalization in these complex surgeries. And I strongly feel that the standard implants will continue to have a very strong role. I think the personalized planning will continue to be more and more used so that the standard implants are put in properly back into the patient. But when it comes to, there is always this debate whether, should the implant be designed according to the patient's anatomy, or should the patient's anatomy be kind of fit according to the implant, right? So take an example, again, this might be a little bit of an off example, but when we go buy shoes or shirts for us, we don't do tailored all the time, right? It's rarely you do this because you get your sizes, it fits. It might not be super perfect, but it does the job, and it kind the ecosystem kind of exists, and you can do it. And there are certain situations where it may not be even possible to do personalization, right? For example, in trauma situations where you need to put an implant within few hours, or within 12 hours to within a day, then you don't have the supply chain, and the ecosystem just today does not allow you to do these personalized implants. So I strongly feel that the personalized implant is a very small niche that will continue, but it's the planning and using the standard implant is where I strongly feel that the world is going towards. So yeah, hopefully that gives my perspective.
Are you now comparing implants to shirts, Ketan? Well, I think you have a point there. I said previously that I believe that it's personalized will benefit a lot of patients, but indeed you have a point that it's not. We have to pick our battles.
Exactly.
There is a lot of implants that work perfectly well. Not everything needs to be personalized. Indeed, you have the logistics to consider because they have to be made in advance. So it takes a long time. It costs a lot of money to get the implant to the hospital.
Yeah.
And I remember that I think about 10 years ago, I went to see a spinal surgeon with a brilliant idea, I thought so myself, of personalizing spinal cages. And I think he put me with my feet back on the ground, where he said, yeah, spinal cages, they have such a high success rate, and they achieve fusion in 99% of the cases. So
Right.
what additional advantage do you have
Right.
in personalizing it to the end plate of the
Right.
vertebral column? So that's where indeed you see that these type of implants, and there's probably also other categories, indeed they function quite well as a standard, and they don't need to be personalized indeed.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to look at the value that it provides, right?
Yeah, the cost-benefit ratio needs to
Exactly.
Okay, so right now we discussed like what are the pre-operative planning and personalized surgery helps with the patient care. We also want to touch base about like what quality management system to follow with the patient specific solutions, right? Because that is also very important. So Erik, do you want to share some insights on it?
Yeah, this is something I feel very strongly about. I mean, when, as I said, I started several years ago in this market, And basically, we were making custom-made devices here in Europe without any form of oversight or quality management or whatever. We were actually making implants that were going into patients, and we didn't have a certificate of ISO, we didn't have a CE mark, nothing, but still this was being used. And then things changed a little bit with the introduction of the MDR, and it made things a lot more complex, but I think also for the good, because we need to safeguard actually that the devices that we are developing are safe and effective. That's what the regulators want. And one way to enforce that is to say, okay, you have to work according to quality management system. They don't really specify according to which standard, but yeah, there's only one standard that makes sense, and that is ISO 13485, that describes how you should, well, actually basically what a company should do to be able to make medical devices that are safe and effective. And it's not a recipe book, but it tells you what to consider as part of your quality management system. And I think it's something that is that's very important, because especially if I compare what we were doing with the custom-made devices, and if you compare that to a company developing a standard implant, it takes 6 years to get a standard implant to market, just for all the things that you have to consider and test and verify and validate, whereas you can just design a custom-made device today and have it in a patient next month, but so to speak. So therefore, I think it's very important to have at least a decent quality management system to cover your bases.
Okay. So Jitendra, do you want to add on to something? Like, you are always working towards patient-specific solutions day in, day out. So
Yeah, so see, I definitely agree with Erik here. Of course, when it comes to manufacturing a medical device, irrespective of the fact whether it's a conventional standard or a custom made, there has been these standards, ISO 13485 being, on top of that, which basically defines all the guidelines, whether it's the smallest of the screw or a syringe, and all the way up to this complex implants for the arthroplasties and other things. However, right, again, one interesting point what Eric mentioned, when it comes to the standard implants, of course, there's like a lot of regulations and the process approvals as well. And that's where I think these customized implants kind of find it way little easier when it comes into the market. However, having said that, it's not completely like ignored by the authorities or the regulatory bodies. So I'm pretty sure, for example, the European MDR has its own set of guidelines. Here in India, we've got CDSCO, which kind of defines specifically even for these custom-made devices. TGA in Australia probably would have their own, FDA in US would have their own. So one thing which is most important when you're talking about these customized medical devices is the process. So I can understand and I relate to Eric that, okay, this is, one of a device which is manufactured only once and only for that specific individual patient. So how do we really validate that? But again, the process, right from the CT to 3D modeling to maybe designing, that remains most of the time similar. So that process has to be validated, and that has to be basically submitted as a form of dossier to these regulatory bodies, or of course, ISO has their own guidelines, which kind of also helps you to do that. But in my view, of course, we should follow these specific guidelines based on the geographical regions, whatever the regulatory bodies are.
And that's
That's
actually
pretty
how that's how I got into this field, is that indeed you can't have a CE mark on a custom-made device, but
Yeah.
because the device is always different. But on the other hand, the way you make your device, the process, as you say, to get to it, that's basically always the same, except for the patient matching bit. And that's also why we made the strategic decision at some point to go for an ISO, because that basically certifies your process if you can't certify your product. But that is also something that I expect is going to change. And you mentioned already regulatory bodies, and I think especially the TGA in Australia They are quite far ahead of the rest of the world, I would say, whereas they don't speak about custom-made devices anymore, but they speak about patient-matched. And that is something that they expect will be certifiable. So, and I also expect in Europe, we will go towards a CE mark for patient-matched devices, which are custom-made to a certain degree. So that is coming, and I think people should prepare for that.
Ketan, do you want to add?
Yeah, I can't agree more. I think the quality is like paramount, and like Eric said, like there are standard implants that take forever to develop and deploy into the system, and because of this custom made device, many of these were putting into the patients. Many times, like we've seen service bureaus who have no idea of developing a medical device is actually implanting or manufacturing a custom made implant and delivering it. So it's really alarming at some point. But I think, the industry and the regulatory bodies are also now waking up and people are realizing it. And I'm happy that things are moving, but it still needs to go even further in terms of quality, because, this is a medical device. This is not a prototype that you're making. It goes into the patient forever. So
Not
the
assured,
processes
hopefully.
needs to be validated. You just cannot have the processes not validated and put it in. So we have seen early on, even service bureaus who have a metal 3D printer trying to say that, okay, we can be a manufacturer of custom implants. But I think the regulatory bodies are waking up, and now it's really getting into a patient match devices over custom devices. That really helps, because if it's a custom device, it's maybe one or two in a year, that's okay. But when it comes to a patient match device, like Eric said, it needs to be regulated. It needs to have all the processes in place so that that the patient outcomes are reported. There's the regulatory bodies have to be informed about failures in the system, and until you don't bring these disciplines of this as a personalized devices, the scalability also kind of becomes a challenge. Of course, there is a cost involved, but as a medical device company, you have to go through this, and the process validation is absolutely paramount. I think the regulatory body across the globe is there is a US FDA guideline that has come out. TGA, as Eric said, is already there. Even the India FDA CDSO is also put out more details about this. So I think overall it is going in the right direction, but there's still a lot of work to be done, a lot of awareness to be made into those who are manufacturing. Right, at the end of the day, the ownership of these devices has to be the companies that have the design history file. Right, they're going to own the product, and they are the legal manufacturer of the device, and they need to be taking the accountability of these failures if it happens. So I think quality plays a key role, and it's also one of the things that will in the long run define. And I think having processes, systems in place, having platforms, online platforms that allow you to have proper visualization, communication, having checklists, having systems in place really helps kind of endorse that there's a consistent quality in these personalized devices.
Got it. So I feel there are so many processes involved, to manage the quality management system. So like from handling the quality management system, let's dive into the challenges also. So Jitendra, what sort of challenges do you face while planning this patient-specific implants and instruments?
Yeah, of course. I think, one of the challenges we've just kind of discussed regarding this regulatory and quality, which of course is a challenge, but then I would say there's always work around, and there's always a specific guidelines that have been laid down. If, Ketan mentioned it very well. So we at Jajal Medical are very specific about this regulatory and quality parameters where we have all the necessary approvals, and that's important. But, coming back to the challenges that you asked, I would say the very first challenge that we generally face is the communication, right, between a surgeon and an engineer, and then because it's an interdisciplinary team, right? It's not just one person kind of sitting on the computer and designing these things and converting the scan, and boom, you've got the model ready. There's a lot of other things that are involved other than the manufacturing challenges that we have. So one of the foremost challenges is basically about these, communication. how do we really communicate well to the surgeons? And it's very important, right, that we understand what the requirement is. As an engineer, as a a device design engineers, we have to be very specific about those mechanical challenges, and of course the clinical challenges kind of comes along from the experience of that clinician. So that's one of the challenge I can think of. Other than that, of course, we've discussed. I'm not gonna dive too much into that regulatory and quality thing. So those are few challenges, but if I may just also kind of add on, why, again, I'm kind of going back to the regulatory still on my head. So when we talk about these regulatory challenges or the quality challenges, of course, ISO 13485 is one. But guys, we've got so many standards which define these specific medical devices. Whether it's, for example, ISO 14997 for the risk management of that. When we talk about the nature and contact of your medical device, there's ISO 10993, right? Even as a software, right? I think Ketan might explain more about it. But when we talk about software also as a medical device or these online communication platforms, those have been defined clearly with IEC 62304, right? So, I mean, while there are challenges, there are also kind of solutions right out there. And I think the awareness, right? I think Ketan and Erik kind of brought this point. Awareness is the key, right? People do not really are aware of these things, and they say, oh, it's a customized device, and we can do whatever that is required with that. Sometimes, not everywhere, not everyone, but I mean, those mindset has to be changed, I would say. So challenges, of course, solutions are right there. That's what I feel. So,
Yeah, it's nice to hear you mention all these ISO standards. But that is, I think, where a lot of people are unaware. They are very familiar in the common medical devices, standard medical device industry. They know all these standards and all these numbers, but people starting in this business thinking that custom-made devices are easy and are exempt from regulations, they struggle with all these numbers because they never really heard of that. And I also came from that point. Before, I never heard of all these different standards. But yeah, as you say, they are quite important, and obviously one of the a few of the challenges, because they all tie together. I mean, ISO 13485 is risk-based. They don't mention 14971, but it's meant like that. So and then you have indeed the biocompatibility one, the 10993. So these are for standard device manufacturers. They know all of these things, and I think it's a case that also the people that are making custom-made devices should make themselves really familiar with all these standards and apply them actually.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Erik, but I think, Erik, there's a lot more than just the quality. I think when it comes to personalized, the challenges that we face, right, is starting from getting the CT scans from hospitals, right? Do you have CD? Somebody has a CD, and they will expect that they will somebody will come and pick up the CD, right? To segmentation, to the time it takes to do the segmentation, to when you have metal artifacts, you have so much noise, the mistakes the segmentation engineer could make, and that small mistake could have a significant impact into the final outcome of the patients actually, right? So there's a lot of labor involved in doing the segmentation, right? It's not so when it comes to personalized medicine and personalized these devices, yeah, it is a time consuming, labor intensive tasks, right? So it is, when you look at a standard implants, you can just have them stock it up and stack it up and use whenever you need it. Here you have to all the way start from getting the data, segment it, plan it, then do the communication. Once all this is done, right? Let's assume that everything was done perfectly. You're in the OR, and then especially when it comes to custom implants, there is also still some percentage of risk that the implant may not fit. Okay, now what if it does not fit in the surgery? Who's gonna take the ownership, and what are they gonna do? Right. So when you have a standard implants, you still have a backup. This is a size is too big. Okay, I'll use a smaller size, and they have it available. But when it comes to custom, they're also stuck in a way, right? So these are challenges more from the surgeon's perspective, that hey, is my device going to fit? And those are the challenges, like even Jitendra mentioned, right? To convince and get the community or the surgeon community to be able to kind of adopt to this technology is going to take some time, because they also many times expect that it will fit like a Lego block and a magic, it will just go and fit in. But in reality, it takes time, right? You still have to prepare the surface, and then the custom implant does fit. So gaining their confidence, those are some of the challenges that we see. And then when it comes to, say, surgical planning, and when it comes to, say, personalized like these patient specific guides or jigs and fixtures for the surgery, the 3D printed, the newer technologies is actually getting better, right? So one of the challenges that I feel like these challenges are getting better, just like how in the regulatory side there's more and more awareness. Similarly, I think if you look at say 3D printed models and guides, one of the challenges was that it used to take forever to ship it. So once you 3D print it, it takes a little bit of a time to kind of ship it to the location and all. Those challenges are now getting away with some of the fast printers, right? Some of the printers now can print in SLA in few hours, and they can use it, steam sterilize it, and use it in the surgery. So that has enabled a next level of point of care, where the hospitals are now ready to put a printer there and then plan the surgery next day. Those are the things that are really kind of taking off. And I think with more and more surgeon communication platforms allowing engineer and surgeon be on the same page beforehand and plan the surgery really well, I think it's going in the right direction. Or even some of the challenges that I could see on the sterilization side, like many a times, the ability for you to do steam sterilization with a specific parameters may not go well with the hospitals, right? So what if the hospital used the wrong parameters for doing the steam sterilization for your, say, guide or a model, and then that model crumbled, that shows up in the surgery, right? So these are challenges that I think I would say that there are more early hiccups, and I feel like as the industry and as the surgeon community uses these technologies and are patient to kind of adopt and learn and take it forward, these challenges are there, but I think we can slowly overcome them.
If I may add, um, communication indeed, we spoke about it a little bit before. I think that is also key to really capture the requirements of a surgeon, but also his feedback and his input. And that is something we also struggled with early on, is that initially when you are small and you're next to the hospital, you can actually go see the surgeon with your laptop and ask him for his input. But the bigger you get and the further away these hospitals, it's impossible to do that. And then the next best thing would be an online meeting. But surgeons are always busy, pressed for time. And when they have 5 minutes in between surgeries, that's when they would like to look at your design. And for a company, that's impossible to plan. Or they want to look at your case at 10 p.m. in the evening. So indeed, a decent planning platform is also crucial, not only to do case management, but also to capture the input and the feedback of the surgeon whenever he has time to look at a case.
Yeah. Yep. I'm glad, Eric, you kind of, again touched upon that. Of course, so we cannot agree more with you on this. We definitely use these pre-op planning platforms where, all the stakeholders, including the design engineer or the surgeons and the fellow surgeons, right, and the other interdisciplinary team members would be able to get these platforms and the 3D viewers and the pre-operative plan, whereby a person sitting somewhere in US, right, would be able to see that plan which is done by somebody like us in India, right? And they would be able to see that and kind of comment it on it like 10 p.m. in the evening that you mentioned, right? So I think that's very crucial to have such kind of platform. And I think post-COVID era, I think we've learned this hard way, but now most of the things are like online, and I mean distance definitely is not a challenge, I would say. And it's really funny, right? When we talk about initially when you brought about the logistics and the challenges, and Ketan kind of just now given that solution of point of cares, right, these are certain things which can definitely help shorten your lead times if you've got a printer within the hospital. Now of course you cannot have a manufacturing facility within the hospital. Implants and things like that would still have to be from the centralized facility, but the models and the pre-operative plan, I think definitely there's little to no limitation as of now, if I may say.
Yeah, but there's also a way to be cautious there, because as you say, hospitals, they have no manufacturing experience. So all of a sudden there's this technology and you can use it. In the hospital, you can 3D print, which is brilliant. If you do it right, it's perfect. But indeed, it requires them to learn how to become a manufacturer, and with all the risks that are involved. And sometimes I feel like people are just looking at the risks from a 3D printing perspective, and what can go wrong in the printing. But obviously it's a bit wider than that. But even if you look only at 3D printing risks, I think I see a lot of people making the mistake that as long as you use a biocompatible resin, as it's called, the resin is toxic as hell, but if you print it properly and post-process it properly, it can become a biocompatible material. But you cannot simply trust that if you use that resin in your printer that you get a biocompatible device. And that is something that typically needs to be well, either verified or validated. And that is something that is really that hospitals need to be aware of, that this added responsibility and liability is coming their way.
Yeah. But on the other side, Eric, I think what really helps having these point of cares where the 3D printing happens in the hospital is there are multiple departments that start leveraging this technology, right? So many a times you may have, say, one department, say oral maxillofacial, who was interested, but now, the orthopedics, the oncology, everybody kind of starts using it. And in terms of taking the risks, I think hospitals already are quite risk taking, I would say. If you look at some of the early days, right, where they used to take this PMMA and manually create like a dough and put the cranial plate on the PMMA. Yeah, you think about that as an example, and where we are today with these printers and having the ability for them to kind of do a lot of things preoperatively and plan it. But I totally agree that having these processes in place in the hospital is going to be important. But there are a lot of advantages to have these things in the hospital, because it really what we found is it really enables the surgeon to innovate, right? And it gives them one more additional tool they can use in the surgery, and that is kind of going to be a holding hand for them in these surgeries, right? So today, for example, if there is a guide or a cutting guide or something, drill guide that they use, before that it was eyeballing, right? So it is definitely better than the eyeballing that they were doing before. So while it may be, I'm not saying that we have to not do this, we have to implement the process and all, but the advantages still are significantly higher to have these point of care in the hospital. And I think the industry is really moving towards that, where more and more hospitals are adapting to having a local segmentation software, right? So they will have a segmentation software that will convert CTs to 3D, and then they will have a printer where they would 3D print a basic model for patient education, for visualization for surgeon, or even doing a physical surgical planning, right? They would print it, and then the surgeon would do like a virtual surgery on that plastic model, or they can do something with the engineers, right? So what we're seeing is more and more the hospitals are seeing adoption of this, but the gap is how to put these into a process and the systems so that it's consistent and you get better outcomes every time.
Yeah, they definitely help at point of care with the adoption amongst the different departments, because they promote it internally. It's something as an external company you can never achieve. And they don't have the problem of of that communication issue with the surgeon, because the surgeon can just physically walk in and talk to the engineer. So that actually indeed is a great benefit. And yeah, the whole struggle with quality management, that is something that I can help them with.
It feels like while talking on the challenges, we also find the solutions and the processes and the technology that are paving the way. So, while we are talking about these processes and technology, do you want to also touch base upon the technology, new technology that is coming in with AR, VR, AIML, and everything? Like, Ketan, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so I think the AR, VR, and the AI is going to enable. Again, I strongly feel that these are all enablers, but we would never be able to have. There's this myth that there will be a software that will make automatic segmentation and everything will be like. It will show up perfectly. It will never happen, at least in my career, I feel. So there will always be a pair of eyes needed to do the segmentation, and AI will kind of increase the efficiency, right? So let's say a 3D model segmentation was taking 2 hours. Now it may take 20 minutes because the hard work is picked up by some of these tools. But at the end of the day, you still have to have a manual editing that needs to be done to kind of perfect it, and two pair of eyes to kind of look at it and ensure that it is good and it matches the patient's anatomy deformity. Because many of the reason these patients come is because they are diseased, and every disease is unique, right? And every patient's anatomical deformities are unique. So I think while AI is going to increase in efficiencies, and that's going to help, but there will still be the processes needs to be implemented, definitely. The other side, on the AR VR side, I think that to me is really the future, where instead of 3D printing now with mixed reality technologies, you can actually see that 3D printed model without even printing it, right? So with the mixed reality, you can kind of hold that virtual model in your hand, look at it, show it to the patient, even have it next to you in the surgery, so that you can really plan the surgery, or execute your plan accordingly. So I think the use of AR VR along with navigation and robotics is, I think, is where the world is going, and I think we're just scratching the surface. I think the combination, the future looks really bright, and I think those are the areas we will see a lot of innovation and adoption of these personalization will happen because of not just 3D printing, right? But because of the this AR VR technologies and surgical navigation and robotics.
If you look at indeed these augmented reality applications where you see on screen, you can see the direction in which you need to saw or drill and the correct depth. It's all brought to you visually. Then I'm like, oh my God, what are we doing with these surgical guides? That's so low tech to provide a little plastic device that tells you how to cut. Obviously based on a solid preoperative plan. But if you can see that using augmented reality, that looks so much better than a disposable piece of plastic, so to say.
Yes and no, Eric. So I think these 3D printing and surgical guides are like the preoperative intelligence, right? So your surgical planning happens before the surgery, right? So it provides you preoperative intelligence, but these guides are sort of dumb inside the operation theater, right? So they just are there and you execute accordingly. But the AR, VR, and the navigation robotics kind of brings the intra-op intelligence, right? So I think when you use them together, right, you get a preoperative intelligence with these 3D planning and models and guides, and then intra-op intelligence with these AR, VR systems. So I think when you combine the pre-on and intra-op intelligence, that's where you get high efficiency, high accuracy for these surgeries. So I think they both have their roles. Just to give you an example, right? If you, let's say, a shoulder guide, you can have that ready printed and you just place it and drill it. You don't have to think in the surgery, right? So it gives you a preoperative intelligence that you execute in the surgery without even thinking, or there's less thinking involved. While if you use a navigation, there will be a registration process. They have to pick the points, and then there needs to be an RMS accuracy. And if the points are incorrect, they have to pick the points again, and then the alignment will happen, and then you do the planning. By that time, the guy would have already drilled using the printed guide and move forward 10, 15 minutes, right? And that's a huge time saving. So I strongly feel that it's going to be a combination. There is room for both to kind of grow and work together to bring more efficiencies.
Yeah, one thing that we also would have to overcome then is that I think surgeons especially are very tactile minded, or how do you say it? They really want to have something in their hands and touch it and look at it from all sides. So augmented reality is nice, but it doesn't give you the haptical feedback, and
Yeah,
yeah, it's still, how do you say that? It's still future, because the value of having something in your hand is not to be underestimated, I would say.
true. I think I was just about to mention the same point, given when we talked about this VR or the AR thing, where of course I also kind of believe there would be cases where you may not be required to 3D print a physical model to understand the defect. It's just the virtual, and kind of that time is also safe. But then when it comes to the actual complex surgeries, right? What happens practically inside the OT? There's a patient lying down, there's a bone, and Eric just mentioned he's going to feel the bone, he's going to feel all that thing when he's doing that. So there's nothing like the analog planning at times as well, with a model where surgeon can definitely feel touch. It's basically like how we are communicating on the screen and when we speak in person. No matter, there could be a sci-fi and all the fancy things about the hologram, I can see Eric right in front of me, in real size. But then again, when we talk in person, that's a different. And similarly, when there's a surgery model which a surgeon can really analyze his one or two or three different approaches that he's planning, nothing like that. And again, I think it's a combination, as you rightly pointed out. There will be few cases where of course that kind of qualifies for the AR VR thing, and we necessarily don't have to scratch our head getting into the printing of the model and doing this and that. But again, I feel that okay, it's going to take still a bit of a time where we may have all these things that I'm mentioning. Maybe Ketan will bring that heptile tactical feedback into the model, into the VR model, and it's like actually operating onto the patient. So definitely future is vast, I must say. But as of now, this is my personal opinion. Of course, guides, models, and also the AR VR would find its own ways, and case specific, I would say.
Okay. So I think this brings us to the end of this webinar. We believe that there are definitely many challenges and the processes that needs to be defined with the personalized medical devices, but there are also many opportunities, and we need to definitely give it more and more refinement to the personalized healthcare. So yes, the future is very bright, and with that, like we have so many questions coming on from the attendees, so let's take that. And before moving to the questions, we would request all the attendees to share your thoughts on what sort of topics we should come next, like prepared next for our next webinar. So definitely you can type it in the chat section, and we will take up from there, and we will come up with the more and more interesting and insightful webinars. With that, let me open up the question and answer round. So we have a first question from the anonymous attendee. The question is in regards to software for segmentation and pre-op planning for building personalized implants. What role do regulatory bodies across the globe play in validating and clearing software solutions? I'm struggling with choosing software providers and our partners for both segmentation and pre-op planning software. Ketan, do you want to take this question?
Yeah, I'll take this question. So, I think if you are planning to have a model or a guide as a manufacturer of that, right? So you have to still validate your own entire process. Okay, so ideally, you can use the softwares that are available, but you will still have to validate your own process of delivering these solutions, because at the end of the day, even a drill guide is a medical device, and you have to go through the validation process and accuracy studies and things like that. Now, in terms of what software you should use and how do you get the validations, that is something that we can also help you with. We provide these white papers that kind of provide you details about what are some of the accuracy studies, some of the publications that already exist in terms of accuracy, and how you validate, that is something we can help you with. And I can put my email address in this. Feel free to reach out, and we would be, one of us can kind of help you put this together in terms of what you need to do on selecting these software. But at the end of the day, right? So you may it's a constant debate, right? So what's if you use, say, a software, do you validate? And there is no end to this on one end, but there needs to be some basic sanity check that needs to be done. So what I mean by there's no end to it, so for example, let's say you use an email to send us a surgeon uh, a plan, a PDF plan, right? Are you going to validate your email outlook? Okay, are you going to validate how your PDF works? That's going a little bit too far, right? But on the other side, if the software that you are using is the output, the 3D output that it generates, is it accurate enough? Does it match the original CT scans of the patients? Those are fundamentals that needs to be done. And usually you will see that manufacturers provide you these inputs and information that you need. But if you are using, again, many times, let's say if you're designing something, you may end up using, say, SolidWorks, right? So now SolidWorks will not have any accuracy studies or anything that you would get, but then you will have to do it on your own, where you will have to follow the entire process, and the final product that you are going to sell to the surgeon that will be used in the surgery, that needs to be validated. And these all components become piece of your entire process validation. That's what Erik was talking about, that you need to validate your process, not an individual software. At the end of the day, it's the final process, the final output that matters. Erik, you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, please. So I see in the question that the question is posed as what role do regulatory bodies play in validating and clearing software solutions? But we can't expect them to validate. Regulatory bodies, they will not do the validation. As you clearly said, Ketan, that's something you as a user should do yourself. You should validate it for your intended use. And it's actually quite similar to what I already briefly mentioned before with the resin. And it's nice that there's a resin sold as being biocompatible, which gives you the trust that indeed, if you perform it right, you will in the end up with a biocompatible device. And the same with the software. If the software is somehow cleared or has a CE mark or whatever, then you have the confidence that the software is decent. But that doesn't absolve you from validating your own process. So even with a certified software or whatever, you would still need to validate your own process, and being able to demonstrate to the regulatory bodies that you have your whole process covered from start to finish for the type of device that you are creating.
Thank you, Ketan and Erik. We have another question from Manoj Vishnu Kumar. He says, what about personalized medical device challenges for children and teens, where frequent resizing due to growth happens? Like Jitendra, this might, you might want to take this.
Yeah, so I mean that's really a nice question, because see, when we talk about children with and they're constantly in the growth phase. Now I cannot definitely work on a specific medical implant which will be only for the current disease, right? So of course there's answers to it. Again, this might be depending on a lot of clinical indications and contraindications where we want to use the customized implant or a personalized implant for that matter. We can still use the personalized planning, right? Because I think it's little wide when Manoj is asking about the personalized medical device. So medical device, it could be surgical guides which can be planned for a specific osteotomy or correcting that deformity. But I think when the growth factor is attached, we're talking about the implantable device here, right? When there's an external prosthetic orthotic, it's still fine. You can still basically revise those designs. For the implants, there are different engineering that have been done. For example, the implant could be resized, or after a certain period of time, it could also be increased in sizes. Those are few options. But I personally believe, I think that should not be the case for the implantable device when it comes to the pediatric. That's my opinion. Very clear.
I think that's very dangerous ground to tread. I mean, indeed, if it's a surgical guide or something to help the surgeon, by all means. But I also remember one case where we had to make a cranial implant for a skull that was still expecting to grow. So yeah, then you can come up as an engineer. You're trying to come up with all these mechanisms that the implant expands, but yeah, a child is not a experimental playground, excuse the language. But on the other hand, they will need to be helped. So and I think that's really where custom-made device would come into play instead of this is something you can't patient match or whatever. This is something that is so unique. But yeah, I think that is really something to be careful with, and something that has to be decided case by case, with a good engineer and an experienced surgeon together to come up with the because at the end of the day you will need to have something for this patient, and if it's not patient matched or customized, the surgeon will take something standard or God forbid go back to PMMA or whatever. So yeah, this is a tricky one.
Yeah, I agree with Eric. I think, there are GMRS cases where, you have these large bone cancers where, the patients, these younger kids, they have to replace the entire joint, and then, the length needs to be changed. But, I think those technologies already exist, and, it's personalization of the planning. But, the device at the end, many a times is a standard one that you use. But yeah, I think it is a fine balance, and many a times the surgeons don't have too many choices, but to use what they have.
Thank you. The next question we have is from Nicholas. What is your opinion driving the most lack of trust towards PSI?
I can try answering this. So, I think it's not lack of trust. It's, if you look at the industry, the industry and the surgeon community has to work together. And there's a common ground, right? The expectations many a times the surgeon is that, like I said earlier, it's like a Lego block and it will perfectly fit, and they can just go out of the surgery. It doesn't work like that. There's soft issues. They have to prepare the patient. So it is two-way communication, I think, is really key on getting the success. In my experience, it takes long time, maybe 6 months, 1 year, multiple surgeries where, there's a persuasion happening on both sides, where the surgeon and the engineers are equally interested in making it happen. But I think, once you pass through that phase, then it's an amazing journey for surgeons and the engineers and the patient, that, you get much better outcomes. But when it comes to early days, the expectation needs to be set properly, and that should kind of take care of these challenges, I feel.
From my perspective, the lack of trust, that was mainly a few years ago when, custom-made devices were done by a lot of small companies that were seeing an opportunity, whereas the larger corporations, the more well-known medical device companies, they didn't want to, burn their fingers yet on this new technology, so they stayed away from it a little bit. But nowadays, you see that when they also start offering patient match, that gives more trust also to the surgeons, because they are familiar with the brands. And as a small company, having to convince a surgeon who has never heard of you, that's always difficult. And there's a lack of trust because they don't know you and they don't know what you can do. So I guess the more the bigger companies are going to do this, obviously the less opportunity for smaller companies, but the more trust there will be in general, I think, in patient match devices.
Yep.
Thank you, Ketan. Thank you, Erik. So we have one more question coming from one anonymous attendee. Best in class or preferred software platforms for segmentation, including any automated solutions like pre-op planning, example 3D systems versus materialize versus new companies? Any suggestion?
Well,
Ketan, sorry,
yeah,
Jitendra.
yeah, I'll just quickly say, I mean, of course, we really cannot, I mean, as a host here, I would say, or as a participant here, I would say that, every software would have their own capabilities, things. It really depends on what's your specific expectation, or what exactly are you trying to do with these softwares, right? So it would not be right to say that, okay, this is better, that is better. In my opinion, I personally feel what serves your specific product, or the device that you're trying to design. It depends on that one. And of course, as Eric kind of just a few minutes back, he mentioned, just because a software would have a CE or FDA marking, or TGA approval or whatever, that doesn't basically validates your whole process, right? You still have to validate your whole process of using that software into your specific process to derive that device that you're designing, right? So it really depends, I would say. Most of the softwares out there are amazing, whether it's from XYZ company, whether we're talking about 3D systems or the Materialize, or any other softwares like My Segmenter and other things. Of course, it really serves your specific person and purpose, and you still have to validate. You still have to validate, right? No matter what. That's my take on it.
Yeah,
Well,
I would add to what Jitendra said. I think it's a topic on its own. So this could be another topic where we could potentially have another call or another such webinar where we can have maybe different companies kind of come together and kind of talk about this. So I think it's a good topic for another webinar.
agree. So let's take the last question for this webinar. This is coming from Rishabh. What are the dimensional tolerances for surgical guide and implants that should be achieved according to you guys? Let's say for arthroplasty or cranioplasty.
Okay, I will just kind of start, and maybe Eric, you can also add on your views. So it's very specific, it's very straightforward. When we talk about these dimensional tolerances, it really depends on the software and the hardware both. Hardware as in, when you're printing something, what is the discrepancies that are coming from your digital file to the actual physical file that you've got. And similarly, what you can actually do a step prior in the software to kind of compensate for these discrepancies that might come, right? So this dimensional tolerances, of course, when you go around the net, and you will definitely find there's a lot of these technologies would define, and the printer OEMs would define that these are the tolerances, and they always give you upper limit and lower limits. But again, for the arthroplasty or for the cranioplasty, whatever specific device that you are designing or trying to create, has to be dependent on both the software and the hardware, and accordingly, you'll be the better judge to get your own dimensional tolerances for that.
Yeah, in terms of dimensional tolerances, I mean, most of the time you're starting from a CT scan with a slice thickness of 1 millimeter. And I am convinced that with proper segmentation, you can get sub-millimeter accuracy out of that. But then indeed you have the limitations of your manufacturing hardware. I mean, printers also have a certain tolerance of making parts, but in the end, it also doesn't make sense to put the tolerance too strict. Once I had a client who was using us as a contract manufacturer, and he wanted a tolerance of 5 thousandths of a millimeter. Well, that's simply unattainable in 3D printing, I would say, without post milling. But yeah, to give a decent answer, I think tolerance should be in the order of a few tenths. So 0.2 or 0.3 millimeter at most, but also not lower than that, so to say. And also in surgery, there's always tissues in the way. So making it a perfect fit is always a challenge, because there's always tissues that are in the way, and maybe you haven't seen or you haven't properly segmented on CT. So therefore, you also need to account for a little tolerance.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be in that range of, less than 1 millimeters, but you have to account for soft tissues that might also be there. And but it's sub-millimeters. I think the short answer is correct. Within 0.5 to 1 millimeters, I think is good.
Okay. Thank you, guys. With that, let's wrap up this webinar for today. I think it was a very great discussion, and thank you, panelists, for joining in. Thank you, Ketan, Jitendra, and Erik, for your
Thank you.
time. Thank you, attendees, for joining.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bina.